Got a real nice quarter sawn piece of Paduke here. This is very, very strong wood. As thin as that is, you'd be hard pressed to bend it. I mean, it's incredibly strong stuff. It's got a really good tone. So this will make an excellent piece for replacement. By the way, I might just add that people were asking me, how do you know this was originally done by Gibson? Well, the proof is in the pudding. See that piece of mesh right there? That mesh went over part of the bracing. You know, they use this mesh in the X bracing. They use this mesh on a couple of other key braces where the intersection is. And they got sloppy and some of the mesh came over the top of this. And I can tell you for sure that mesh was original from the factory. So this came original from the factory as well. Now we'll just saw that out. Well, there you go. Now that is a brick of wood right there. It is solid. I've got it down to 125 thousandths. Actually, it's slightly above that. It's like 128 thousandths, 127 thousandths. That's right at 1/8 of an inch. And so that's quite a bit thinner than what they had in there as plywood. And I guarantee you this is 5 times stiffer, and yet it's way more resonant wood. It's just a very resonant wood. This will make a great bridge pad. I'm going to just do a dry fit up in there. Here's the original one, and you can see they match up pretty well. The original one is definitely warped really bad. You can see it rock from side. See how much it rocks there. Whenever I pinch it down, you can see the rock in it. This is flat as a pancake, and it's so stiff that it'll flatten out this top here, especially when I put some cauls in there to clamp it between. You'll have to take my word for that. This was a clean rag before I started, but you can see what comes off of this wood. It's an amazing amount of resins and different things in this wood. But wiping it down with the acetone is always a good idea. It's always recommended. Here's a clean spot right here, and I'll just rub it down and you'll see that it's no longer clean. It just amazing how much stuff is in that wood. But I've never had a problem gluing it. It glues fine, but it's just a good precaution to wipe it down with the acetone first. Got my tight bond glue, and I'm just about out. Going to have to go get some more. I was just at the hardware store a little while ago. I should have got some. As usual, I got a little more glue on there than I need. I want plenty of coverage. I just don't want to have a ton of squeeze out around the edges. I have this extra caul made up already. I'm hoping it'll stick up in there just temporarily long enough for me to get my hand out and put the caul back in there. Now I just need to get one of these clamps in there, which is not that easy to do when your arm is in the hole already. So I've got a piece of parchment paper here to keep this outer caul from sticking to the top, because the glue could squeeze up through those holes. I'll look inside there and inspect everything to make sure everything's in the right place. I think I'm satisfied with that, and I see good glue squeeze out pretty much everywhere. Now I want to just verify that the clamps are about where they need to be before I tighten them down. You know, having that bridge plate sandwiched between the two cauls should completely flatten this guitar top back out. The guitar top itself, while it's not flat, it's actually a soft wood and a very flimsy wood. All of the rest of this wood is very hard wood, very stiff wood, so pressing it all together very tightly should flatten that soft wood out just like a pancake. It's been 24 hours, or very close to that anyway, so it's the next day, obviously. We're going to take the clamps off and see what we ended up with. good news is the caul fell out on the inside, so that means it didn't get glued in there by accident, which could happen. Wow, that looks just as flat as a pancake. Maybe you can see that. Just as flat as it can be. I pointed out in the prior clip when we took the bridge off that it chipped out here. It's been cut there like a knife. You can see it just as plain as day. It was, you could just tell how straight it was cut across there. So when you cut something across like that, straight like that, you know, it's got a tendency to break out on grain like this. It was cut through here too. You can see a scratch there, but apparently it wasn't deep enough to cause a problem on that side. Anyway, it did cause it to chip out right there. You could probably get away ignoring it, but I don't like to do that. So let's see. Let's just see if we can tell you how deep it is. It's about 37 thousandths, so you're getting close to a millimeter there, deep. 33 thousandths. So, you know, 40 thousandths would be about a millimeter. Well, I'm not going to deal with that at the moment. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to turn my attention to making a new bridge. And there's already been a number of suggestions to make it oversized. Well, 99.9% of the time, whenever I make a new bridge, I do make them oversized. It just makes sense. You cover a little bit of your flaw area here, and I don't go crazy on that. You know, a lot of people would make them really big to cover up everything. I don't do that generally. I generally make them about a 1/16 of an inch in front and about a 1/16 of an inch in back, which is pretty small, a little over a millimeter and a half, bigger on each side. And that will help cover up a little bit of this scar, although it's not going to cover it all, and it will cover up some of this. But one of the main things it will do is it'll get me into fresh wood area that I can clean off and then make everything, you know, at one level. Here at the drill press, I have a plug cutter in here, and I've already cut one plug out of this piece of spruce, and it is exactly the right size to fill the bolt holes in that top where the bolts used to go through that old bridge. That will be the perfect size to fill that other hole. Assuming the clip turned out in the other room, you saw me cutting these plugs. The good news is the bigger ones fit very well. The little ones are too small to fit these holes. So that's going to make it more work for sure. I'm only plugging the spruce at this point, so that keeps the bridge plate stronger because I don't have to put those extra holes in there. That's just an advantage I have over what they did in the past. That'll make this top a little bit stronger too, which is always a good thing. I'm pressing under it with my fingers underneath there to push against it so that I'm not pressing down all that weight on the top, but I really am trying to press it in very tightly. And we'll just do the same thing on the other side. I decided to go take a little extra precaution here. I have the caul inside there again, underneath the bridge plate, and I've decided to put these clamps on these two plugs and squeeze them down pretty tight. A couple of reasons. Number one, those plugs are pretty small, and that will actually kind of flatten those plugs out and expand them to the size of the hole, because in places they didn't fit the hole perfectly. And this will kind of expand them out, squish the glue out, all that. And I think it's going to be a better plug job. I've also, off camera, been thinking and pondering, and I believe I've made a decision on what I'm going to do about these holes. There's a lot of tear out around these holes. There's almost no support through. There is a big tear out right here. There's a tear out in between every one of them. So there's like almost no support there anyway. If you remember the Regal Rec guitar that I fixed, this was a giant hole here in that guitar. I mean, the whole thing was a big hole. And I was able to repair that, and it's still structurally sound. This is nowhere near that bad, but it's a cobbled up mess right here, right now. These holes are giant, they're too big. If I put a bridge on top of here and drill, I'm just going to be drilling out more and making a bigger mess in this area. Who knows if those holes would line up either. So, I think what I'm going to do is take a router. I think I'm going to set the router to a certain depth here, and all the way down to the bridge plate, leaving the bridge plate. I don't plan to get into the bridge plate. And I'm going to route out a little rectangle in this area and maybe even have that rectangle overlap some of the original wood here so that it'll tie it into this original wood. If I just put it down in there, it wouldn't be tied back to the original. So, and that means I'd have to make a very complicated insert to go down in here that would have a flap that would lay over this and tie into it. It's complicated. I've got it figured out in my head, though, that it'll make it structurally sound, structurally strong, and allow me to drill new holes, and everything will be clean and neat. Anyway, that's how I'm going to do it. It's probably overkill. I probably don't have to go to that extreme, but I know that'll be the strongest possible way to fix it under the conditions we have right now. Well, I just removed the clamps off those plugs. They've been drying for a little over an hour now, so everything's good there. I want to call attention to a comment that I received, and my reply to the comment was probably inappropriate. Well, I shouldn't say probably. It was inappropriate. The customer said he thought this was not one of my better repair jobs. He thought that I've done too much damage to it. I've cracked this. I've, burnt that, and going to charge the customer extra. Well, I never said I was going to charge the customer extra, number one. I said he'll pay a little more because I'm going to a much deeper extent. I'm doing way more work than the average guy would do on this. Regarding this burn spot, I'm almost positive that will just be gone in a moment. I haven't addressed it yet, but pretty sure that that's just superficial burn. I don't think it's very deep. I think if I scrape this a little bit, it'll go away. I think it's just in the finish. Yeah, it's just in the top of the finish. And you can see it's already starting to go away there. What I really want to say, first of all, I apologize to that person for the comment. Not making any excuses. I got 2 hours of sleep last night, and I'm overworked. So there you go. But I will just say this about repairs in general. And I'm not saying this is sort of impossible. I'm saying it is absolutely 100% impossible to fix anything without making it look worse first. You can't do it. If you have to be destructive to something, in other words, if you've got to repair your house and remodel your house, it's going to look worse before it looks better. You got to tear walls out. I had to tear the biggest part of the structure of this top out. That bridge plate is the biggest, most important piece of this structure. I defy anybody to tear a bridge plate out of a guitar and not cause some damage. It's just next to impossible. It's the hardest thing you will ever do. So the first thing is you will always cause more damage when you're doing something destructive to an instrument. I don't care what kind of instrument it is. I don't care how good you are at doing it. You will always cause more destruction, and it will always look worse before it looks better. So I guess the comment hit me wrong because, like I said, I got very little sleep last night. I'm working myself to death. And personally, I think this is truly going to be one of my best repairs ever. I just believe it from the bottom of my heart. So it just hit me wrong. My apologies to the customer because basically I told the customer, my reply to him was, I'm sorry you're clueless. Well, that was inappropriate. I shouldn't have said that. But my point of being clueless is you just don't understand the process. If you think this is bad and you wouldn't be satisfied with it, then you just don't understand the process. You cannot do this without making it look worse first, period. And to top that off, the other people that have already worked on this have already created additional damages in this area that I'm having to try to work through also, and still take this big heavy piece of wood out of the inside of the guitar, which is firmly glued inside. This piece of wood is much stouter than this whole top is. So getting this out of there is not easy. Anyway, that's enough of that rant. I apologize to the guy who made that comment. I shouldn't have said what I said, but, you know, my excuse is I'm just beat to death. So there you go. I've taken this off. That did work. That kind of pressed that soft wood out and expanded it out to fill the hole even a little bit better. So, but I do need, it was a little thick, so I'm going to take it down now to the top of the guitar. There you go. That works real good. It's very easy to do. The burn mark here has pretty much gone away. I'm chipping off the finish to get rid of all of the burn mark. And of course, I'll just have to put finish back in that spot. But I think it'll finish fine and probably won't show up much at all. So you can see there, it's not that bad. It's not great, but it's not that bad either. The other thing is that you'd be judging a book before it's finished being written, and I haven't finished writing this book yet. When we get done, I promise you this will be an incredible repair. I truly think it's going to be one of my best repairs ever because this thing was in bad shape. I want to just route this mess out because it's so chowdered up right through here. I know it doesn't really show up all that well on camera, but you can see a pretty deep tear out here. This is all across the holes there. It's all tore out. So this is very weak in this area as it is anyway. So we might as well get all this fixed. And like I said, there was a pretty good tear out right here. And again, that wasn't my fault because it was cut very deep right through here for some reason. I don't know why they cut that right there. But whenever you make a cut across the grain, and here's another cut across the grain as I showed you, whenever you do that, and you're prying something up, it's likely to pull it out on this kind of wood. It's very soft wood. Keeping with the theme that we just talked about, that you have to make something look worse before it looks better, this is one of those cases right here. I promise you, this is going to look worse before it looks better. But I know it's the right thing to do. So I've got this on here as a straight edge so that I can make a straight line across these holes. I have to cut across each hole right there and make a straight line. And then I'm going to do the same thing back here further and make a straight line on the back side. Okay, that worked pretty well, and it's about at the appropriate depth. If anything, it's a little shallow, and that's fine with me. I'll just keep it a little bit shallow. I'll scrape it out by hand if I have to. I'm just going to move this all back and try to get a straight line at the back side of those holes. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to move this in one of the holes and move it to the back side, and then I'm just going to move the straight edge up to that and make it tight. I'm going to take this stuff off and I'm going to freehand in between those two marks now. I'd like to be a hair deeper, and I'd like to get this back line a little bit better. It's not as good as I would like. I've got this set up for routing one more time. I just wasn't happy because I wasn't back quite far enough on this back side, and we're going to go through it one more time. Now that's a good straight line, and I believe that we'll be able to just barely cover that with the new bridge. What I want to do, and this is kind of hard to do, but I want to put another line up here, and I want to route about 1/3 of the depth down, just deep enough to get down to this bottom of this big chip out here, and there's some tear out here too. The top seems to be about 100 and 125 thousandths, so I'm going to set this somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40 thousandths depth, and route a lip on this. So basically I'll have, an overlap here, and then it'll go down and fill this trench. That'll be very strong that way. I just realized the camera wasn't on. I drew a line parallel to this back line right through here. I set the depth of the bit to the thickness of the deepest tear out spot, and now I'm just routing along this line by eye. This pick guard gets in the way, so I can't get up on that. It changes my height, so some of this I'll have to do by hand, probably with a chisel. So it's just complicated. It's nothing simple about it. Okay, it gets complicated over here because of the height difference here. It's just, nothing is simple. Like I said, it's going to look uglier before it looks better. And I'm pretty sure we're going to make this much better when we're done. Plans on things like this change by the moment. I've taken an X-Acto knife and I've scored the line. And I'm just going to cut the rest of this out by hand, I think, because it's just complicated. That's pretty darn good. It's just about perfectly flat. So now we're at the saw, and I'm going to cut a piece of spruce that'll be thick enough to patch up the part that we've just routed out. I've determined that a piece that's just a little over 3/4 of an inch wide will be just right. So that piece there should plug the hole very nicely. Just marking the length now so that I'll know how long to make it. And of course, I always make them just a hair longer than I need. So we're going to cut that to length first. And now I try to do everything as simply as I can, because everything just gets so complicated. So you want to just do things as practical and simple as you can. So you just fit it in the hole and mark it right there. Instead of trying to measure everything, you're just better off doing it like that. And then I just transfer the marks to this side. And I just want to mark out that this is the side I'm cutting out. This part will go down in the hole. Since this is getting cut out, I have to cut out enough to let this go all the way to the bottom, and yet this right on this shelf. So I have to cut out just part of that. That won't be that easy to do. I'll have to figure out a way to do it with my router or with some other option, and I'm not just sure how I'm going to do that yet. I might just score it with an X-Acto knife first, maybe even chisel it out. This stuff chisels pretty well, and that might just be the fastest way to do it in this case. I think I am just going to try the scoring method first. Lightly score it with this steel ruler there as my guide. And each cut I try to go a little deeper. That looks pretty good. So now we'll just take a very sharp chisel and try to peel off some of this. The router would be a good option if you had a good way to hold it and a jig made and all that kind of stuff. And all that stuff takes time too, so if I can do it faster without all that, then that's what I'm trying to do here. And then again, I may have to back up and punch. This piece may not work. I may have to start over. So So you can kind of see there I've lipped it out a little bit, but just a little, and that just gives me a ballpark idea, and we'll get the guitar down here and start comparing it close. These corners are slightly rounded, so I'm just going to use this little sander and round the corners of my little block. In addition to rounding the corners, I'm beveling the edges back just a little bit so that they'll, as they go in, they'll get tighter and tighter. That got me close. I mean, it's starting to be there already. It's not there, but we're in the ballpark. It doesn't feel like it's moving at all anywhere. I can't push it down anywhere. I think it's just where it should be. It looks pretty darn good to me. If I had a better way to test that, I would, but that's about all I got. And it really does look solid. I think that's about it, guys. I think we're just going to have to glue that in place, clamp it down really good, let it set for a few hours, smooth it off, and then maybe work on this end down here. We got a nice thick piece of wood here. This is Osage orange, very solid. That'll block it down in there really well. We'll let that sit and dry for 2 or 3 hours. I'm pretty sure that that's a very good, solid repair. I don't think that that's going to go anywhere. When we flatten that off, that'll give us a very good base to put the new bridge on. I think while this is sitting there, I'll start working on making the new bridge. Before I actually make a new bridge, I'm going to see if we can get this piece of wood out of here that's pulled out of the end of that guitar. If we can get it out in more or less one piece, we could put it right back and it'd be no problem. I doubt that's hot enough, but we'll see what happens. Maybe it is. This knife was sent to me by Chuck. He's a retired luthier. So thank you, Chuck. First time I believe I've even tried to use this knife, but it might be cutting under there pretty well. I think I'll heat the knife up a little bit more. I'm going to see if I can make that go back in that guitar and fill that spot in. We'll just leave that by itself there for a while. Got a very, very high-end piece of rosewood here, and very dense, quarter sawed, beautiful piece. You couldn't make a better bridge out of anything, really. This bridge is only, well, it measures under 300 thousandths by quite a bit. I don't know if you can see how much thicker I've made that there, if it shows up, but I'm going to make it that much thicker. I've got this set to cut it about that thick. Now, that's not going to be the finished size, but you got to start a little bit bigger. And hopefully the saw will cut this real good. The blade's getting a little dull, so I'm hoping I don't mess this piece up. Well, that did a nice job. We can work with that for sure. This shim is 84 thousandths. So I'll put this up behind there, like that. I'll set this on top of there, and then I'll draw around it. And then that way this bridge will be about 84 thousandths bigger than the old bridge, which is just about what I want in this case. It'll be a little bit bigger than that even, but not much, because I'll saw outside the pencil mark as well. As I look down on it then, I can tell that we're definitely bigger than the old bridge by just a little bit, and then I'll saw just outside the pencil marks to boot. It's going to be a beautiful, beautiful bridge. that's just about as good as it needs to be, I believe. We'll just look for symmetry and things like that now. This has been drying about 30 or 40 minutes. It's not long enough really, but I need to test the fit of this new bridge I'm making. Just wanted to see how well it's going to cover everything. Wow, that's going to look real nice. Oh, that's going to do just fine. Better than I even thought. Well, I'm real happy with the way that bridge looked on there, so this is going to be a nice bridge. The bridge is rough sawn on the thickness. It's never perfect whenever you do that. So this side is perfectly flat and smooth, so I'm going to keep that side down for the moment. That's the actual top. So I'm going to sand off of the bottom to get the bottom good and flat and parallel to the top. Isn't that a beautiful piece of wood? Hopefully you can see how nice it is. It's just gorgeous. Now this will be the bottom, this will be the top, and let's see how thick we ended up there. I'm not too particular about how thick it is. I want it to be in the neighborhood of 300 thousandths. Well, actually we're a little thin. We're thicker than the old one. I'll be darned, we're at 287 thousandths. So we're about, 13 thousandths below where I wanted to be, which is about 4 human hairs. That's not that much, but it's just a little below where I wanted to be. This one was much thinner. This is only like 260, which is just getting on the borderline of too thin, really. It's 250 on that side. 250, in my opinion, is too thin. This is really just about perfect. It says 290 there, as you can see. And now we're going to taper off these ends. And that's fairly easy to do. The battery went dead there, so I'm not sure how much you got. But we're basically tapering off the ends now to match and make a typical looking Gibson bridge. The ends on this bridge were pretty thin, down to 115, 17 thousandths. That's pretty darn thin, really. 110 thousandths on that end. I've got mine at 140 thousandths there, and 142 thousandths there, 141 thousandths. So it's just about a thousandth different from one side to the other. That's really nice. That'll be good and strong, yet it's not overly thick that it's going to hurt the sound. This is really going to be a nice structural improvement to the guitar. I think it'd be hard-pressed to find a much prettier piece of wood for a bridge. It's beautiful. There's the original bridge. You can see that this one is just a little bit bigger. It's not huge bigger, it's just a little bigger. That little bit, though, makes a big difference when it comes to reinforcing a top like this and trying to make it good and strong where it doesn't do that pull-up thing anymore. See, I don't like the design of this either because those holes are so tiny behind. I mean, there's very little space behind here. And hopefully we can, move this toward the front and leave a little bit more space back here. Not a lot, but just a little bit. Every little bit helps. I think it's safe to take the clamps off of it now permanently. It's been sitting well over an hour. I'm sure it's not completely dry if you were to look at it inside, but on the other hand, it's fine, I think, for what I want to do. I would like to get the bridge on it yet tonight, and that way I can finish it tomorrow. Now we've got something smooth and flat we can work with. Now I'm going to take my little finger plane and carefully level this off, or at least try to. Interruptions. It's almost down to where I want it. I gotta tell you, this has been one of the most difficult pieces of spruce I've carved in a while. Especially as small as this is. This should have only been a 1-minute job for me, but it really doesn't like being carved. I can't find a direction that it wants to go. Every way I go, it feels like the grain is tearing out. That's pretty darn good right there. I'm going to stop right there for now. We'll be doing some more on that when we start fitting the bridge to it. But you can already see that that's going to look really good. There's that one little spot right there where I'll have to repair the finish, maybe a little bit right here. But other than that, this thing's looking really fine. Now I'm going to see if I can get that other wood that tore out right here to fit back in there. Okay, the pieces are right here. They go opposite, so I'm going to set them over here out of my way. Hopefully I can keep it all straight how it goes. This piece goes like this, of course, and it actually has to be trimmed. Fits in there really fine. And we'll of course put some stuff on there to clamp that down. This is going to be very, very nice now. Very proud of that, the way that turned out. I just took the clamps off of here and it is absolutely perfectly flat. You can't feel it even. You know, it still needs a little bit of cleanup, but it's really, really good. I got the bridge kind of temporarily in place. I'm going to just check to see if it looks like it's square to the body line, the center line. It looks real square that way. Test it out this way. Looks really square that way. It looks like it's covering everything I want it to cover. Hopefully you can see maybe the line around there that we've got to scratch off. You know, get all that finish out of that area. And then this baby will be set to go. Well, I gotta tell you, that feels as flat as a pancake. I don't see it could get much better. The only thing I'm gonna do now is I'm going to tooth up the back of this. Well, actually, yeah, I'm gonna tooth it first and then I'm gonna go clean it with acetone. That's pretty nice. It's clean, it's flat, but it got all the shiny stuff off of there, so it's nice and roughed up a little bit. Now I'll clean that with some acetone and we'll glue it in place. All right, it's time to put this baby back together. Okay, washed it off really well. Dry it off real well. And now she just sits for 24 hours and we're on the downhill slide. As you can see, I've got the rig on here to test the intonation. I have not checked it yet at all. I just got it sitting on here. I will tell you a couple of things that are important. If you decide to make yourself a rig like this, and this one's just made out of coat hanger wire. I've got a piece of leather back here to keep the wires from digging in, and I've got a thin piece of plastic underneath the edge up here to keep it from doing any damage to the top. It's not actually touching the guitar really anywhere. It's just hung on the end pin. These are just soldered together and bent over to hold the wire. So I will tell you that if you decide to do something like this to set your intonation, you don't want the strings any higher than they have to be when you're checking it. In other words, you want to try to find a saddle that you can sit on top of here and float around. You can see that this saddle is just sitting there. You want to find something that's going to be approximately the right height when you're done. This might be a little high on the bass side. Looks pretty close on the treble side. I can test it with this gauge that has a bevel on it. This gauge, these are expensive, you know, but I'll give you a close-up there so you can see it. You know, it's called Insize. The number on it, NO4630-1E. And this thing measures in thousands of inches. Now, these are expensive, so don't go looking for one expecting to get it for $5, because they're not $5. Okay, the action's about 90 thousandths. That's within tolerance, I think. It's about 80 thousandths down there. So I think we're in good shape in terms of that. It's barely off the first fret, so I think we're good there. Okay, and the way you do this is, you get it pretty right dead center, then you just lightly put your string down on your 12th fret. Should be exactly equal. Just barely a hair flat, and so you got to move it forward when it's flat. Boy, it's right on the money there too. It looks like pretty close. Just a hair flat that way. So I'll keep this one where it's at and just move this one forward a little bit. Well, doesn't hurt to do it several times to make sure you're not getting a fake reading. All of a sudden it's really flat. It's even worse. I'm moving it the right way. So we'll try it again. That's pretty close. That looks pretty close. Maybe a hair flat. And it doesn't hurt to set your tuner around in a different place, so I'm going to just set it right up on top of the guitar even. I like to, test it, let it rest a minute, test it, let it rest a minute, and kind of, because this is really super important. I don't know that I've ever really gone on my rant about how important it is for the saddle to be right. I mean, it's pretty obvious to most folks it needs to be right, and we've talked about it being right and that you want it just right and all this kind of thing, but I don't think I've ever really gone into the rant part of it about why that's really important. I can give you an example, is probably the better way to explain it rather than trying to get technical. I was at a jam one time and a man walked up to me and said, I heard you can, fix anything that's wrong with an instrument. And I said, well, I don't know about that, but I'll give it a shot. What's wrong? And he says, well, my mandolin, he says, it's a good sounding mandolin, but I can't get it to tune right. I'm always having trouble with tuning. Well, instantly, that's your first symptom of your bridge is in the wrong place or your saddle is in the wrong place. That's your first symptom. Another symptom is a very huge symptom is anytime you capo, if you have to retune, your saddle's not in the right place. And some people will argue with you about that and go, it's the strings or it's this or it's that. But I'm here to tell you, and you can believe or not believe, that's your choice. If you have to retune when you put a capo on, 99 times out of 100, your saddle's in the wrong place. There are other things that could potentially cause it, but not very likely. One would be if your saddle's excessively high, your action's excessively high or something like that, then yeah, that could cause it too. But let's assume that your instrument is set up halfway decent, and when you put your capo on, you have to retune, well then your saddle is in the wrong place. Now, even with it in the perfect place, some people have such a fine ear that they will still have to tune a little bit. But that's a little bit versus having to tune it a half a note or something, Okay. All right, so why is that important? I still didn't tell you exactly why it's important. And the real reason is it's for the sound of the instrument, in my opinion. Whenever the saddle is not in the right place, that instrument will never really sound perfect. It never does. It's always got little dissonant notes beating against each other. it's kind of like it's clashing like this. It just doesn't sound like one cohesive sound, you know, like that. That's a sound. Where it's just kind of like this if you don't have that just right. And what do I mean by that? Well, you got all these notes that are close, but they're not perfect. The moment you get it perfect, then they're all in perfect harmony together. And when you hit a chord, it sounds like a chord. And it just changes the ring of your instrument from like sort of semi-okay to wow. It just punches and it just jumps out there and grabs you. It's significantly different, especially if your intonation is significantly off. And so to finish up that story about the guy with the mandolin, and I promise you this is true, I'm not dramatizing it one bit. I instantly I hit a chord on it and I knew the saddle was in the wrong place. So I did the 12th fret thing real quick and I adjusted the saddle. It took me less than a minute to get it where it needed to be. I tuned it back, hit a couple chords, instantly punching, man. I mean, it was a good mandolin. I can't remember, I believe it was a Weber mandolin if I'm not mistaken, but that was a long time ago. Anyway, bottom line is, I swear to you, he had a tear coming down his cheek. He was so happy. He couldn't even believe it. He says, I've been playing this thing for years. He says, I can't believe it. That's all it was. And he says, it just sounds so much better. He was so excited. So yes, it's that dramatic. It really is. So that's why I take extra pain, and that's why I use this rig rather than measurements. You know, a lot of people say, well, it's double the length. You know, like in other words, this 12th fret is halfway, and basically it is. But, you know, there's other things you have to compensate for. And one reason why the saddle is almost never perfectly straight, you see how this one is at an angle? Well, the main reason for that is your diameter of your strings and your frequency of the vibration of your string. That's why that saddle is always generally compensated. There's a lot of science to it. I don't claim to know all the science to it. You know, I'm sure there's people out there way smarter than me on it. I just do the good old country boy thing and know that it needs to be right, you know, and the way you make it right is with one of these dudes. You know, you just take a tuner, you get it, you take your time. This is not something you rush, especially if you're about ready to cut a slot. And you know how much work I've done on this thing already. I don't want to take a chance on getting that slot in the wrong place. I mean, I want it right. So that's why I move the tuner around. I let it set a little bit and I try it again. And, you know, in fact, I was so nervous about one of them I did. My banjo player, Leon Pruitt, who's an incredible talent and got an incredible ear, can play everything. We had the same conversation about his Martin guitar for like 10 years. And he would argue with me and say, it's a Martin guitar, the saddle, the bridge is not in the wrong place. I said, well, I'm telling you for sure, as much as you have to retune, your saddle is in the wrong place. Now, this was before, I could have done a better job now. I didn't do that great a job on his, I'll be honest, because this was quite a while back. And I moved his whole bridge back where it should be. And, of course, it left a small scar in the front. The way I would do that now is I would just build a new bridge, or I would just move the saddle slot itself if I could. Sometimes you just can't do that. But anyway, I would have covered the scar and hidden it much better today. But he didn't care. The scar was not the issue. He wanted it to sound right. And now that guitar, you talk about a booming guitar. Oh my gosh. It just changed the whole guitar. And so it's very, very, very important to get the saddle in the right place. Ran over. But the action on this is pretty close to where I want it, and that's important. Boy, you don't want to try to get your intonation perfect with your action really high or really low. So I'm going to test it again. We've been talking, the strings have been stretching. These are brand new strings. These are, by the way, these are the customer's brand new strings, and you would say, well, why are you testing with brand new strings? You know, you probably should have just used the old strings or something. Well, the way this jig works is, you've got this much extra length, so when you move this up here, I can cut off that end there and it won't matter. It'll still be like a brand new string. It doesn't hurt this end at all. So it's still going to be like brand new strings. This test doesn't affect anything at all on the string. So that makes it even more perfect because then you're testing with the exact strings you're going to use. I even like to turn the tuner off and turn the tuner back on. Sometimes little things like that can make such a difference. I do like to use my finger rather than a pick when I'm testing intonation. You get a truer note with your finger, believe it or not, than you will with a pick. In fact, if you're having trouble tuning sometime, maybe in a noisy location, a pro tip is to stop using your pick and tune with your finger. You'll be surprised how much better that works. And sometimes you have to hit the note from a different direction. I'm sure old Randy knows all those tricks. Intonation is between this front edge here and the front edge of your nut up here. So that's your string length, is the inside edge of this and the inside edge of this. So when I make a saddle, I make the saddle with a slope like this. And that string leaves the saddle at that last edge of that slope. That's the way I make my saddles. I firmly believe that's the way to do it. Okay, so I fixed that saddle so it has my slope on it. By the way, that slope is somewhere about 10 to 12 degrees is what I typically use. I don't want it a lot of slope, because if you have too much, then it pushes your saddle forward. But about 10 to 12 degrees works real well. And I've remarked it. So basically when I cut the slot, I want to leave the mark but take everything right up to the mark. The first thing I've done is I've anchored this down, tightened it up with these clamps so that it won't move. Then this here floats on top, and I can adjust it at the right angle. And this back rides on there, and I've adjusted it, and I've got the light down here where I can really see well. And I've made sure that the bit is staying just behind the line, just barely behind the line. I had to offset this because this pickguard sticks up pretty darn tall. And I'm hoping I'm going to have enough room here. I think I will. I can keep it down on this piece over here, and this is just kind of keep me at the right height. That's all this does. It seems like it's going to work okay. I've already set the bit to where it's just touching the top of the bridge now. Now the last thing I want to do before I actually set my depth is I just gonna make some eyeball pencil marks on how far I want the saddle to go. I want it to go almost to the end of the flat spot here. So I'm just gonna put some eyeball pencil marks, just so I know to stop when I see, come up to that pencil mark. That way it'll be about equal on both sides. I have this set where it's touching this, but I want to go deeper down in there. So I've got to measure how deep it is now and then set it maybe 100 thousandths deeper than that. So I get about 100 thousandths, and then we'll go another maybe 80 thousandths deeper after that. First thing I do is I get my calipers set on 0 to make sure that they're zeroed out, and then I'll pull them up like this. There's a slide on the back of here, and what I can do then is set them down and slide down till I touch that bit. Then I'll know I'm at the height that touches the top. Right there is touching. Okay, that's 342, and I want to go at least 100 thousandths deeper than that, so all I have to do is go up to 442. That's 100 thousandths of an inch, which is about 2.5 millimeters. And this is something you don't want to take to chance. I always use a pair of pliers, and I've got these soft jaw pliers. I can reach in there and snug that down just a little bit more because I don't want to take a chance on that screwing me up on my cut. This is a kind of a nerve-wracking thing, I got to tell you. Well, you can see I've been invaded, so I'll have to take a time out. Well, isn't that normally the case when you get your interruptions? It's always when you're doing the most critical, touchy part. But fortunately, no problem. It worked fine. I'll turn the calipers on and I'll set them for another 80 thousandths deeper. They're at 442, so that would be 522. Okay, that cut pretty well, I believe. That slot's nice and deep now. In fact, it's very deep. But it's not all the way through the bridge, and that's for sure what I don't think you should go through the bridge. Now, some people would differ with that, but I personally don't think that's a good idea. But that looks like that's just about right to me. See, it's not even 90 thousandths thick, so I don't like that. I want to make it about 100 thousandths thick at least. I'm going to move this back, but I'm going to draw a pencil line there first. It's a tight 100 thousandths, but 100 does go down in there, but just barely. So that's okay. As long as it's close, I think I'm fine. Well, I don't think I had the camera on, but I laid this on here and I moved it to the front edge so that the front edge is lined up, and I make sure the ends were about equal. And I took a very sharp pencil and I marked all these holes. Now I've taken a little awl and I have marked where the very center of those holes is, mostly by eye. I think you can see that I've got a little bit more meat behind mine than they had behind theirs. You know, I've got almost a 1/4 inch behind there where they barely had an 1/8. And I think there's still plenty of room between here and the saddle as well. I think that's going to make a significant difference in the guitar as well, strength-wise especially. With my typical luck, as I re-drilled the holes out bigger, they chipped out a little bit. So I just took my little finger plane, knocked it down a little bit, just kind of recontoured it. And then, you know, I've seen other ones made this way, so it's not like it's weird or anything. But I just recontoured it a little bit. Now I'm going to clean it up with some sandpaper. Now I'm just kind of reaming these pinholes. I'm taking this down to where this almost goes through the top. I can kind of feel it up in the hole a little bit with my finger. I believe that'll do us for now. We might have to address that some more a little bit later, but I think right now we're fine. While I'm touching up the little spots on the finish around this, I thought I might as well just go ahead and fill in a little bit right here where there's a couple of great big deep dents. He's had this, I think, since he was a kid. I'm not really sure, but he's had it a long time. The way I've decided I'm going to cut this, you know, it's difficult to know, but you know, if you remember the test piece that I put on top of there to check the intonation, it was just about the right height. You know, it could have been a little lower maybe, but the curvature was pretty close also. So I'm just going to draw across that. Well, there's what she looks like all finished up. You can see how tight it is. It's absolutely tight. Pretty much looks like it grew in there. And it's probably high still, but high is good. I'm gonna go ahead and just string it up with the nut that's on there. Before I even do that, I'm going to smooth off all this little varnish that I've put in here. And I've actually put in quite a bit more varnish, and it's been drying over the last day. I've shown this before, but these pegs that are in there, they're squared off at the end. I like to file a bevel right across the little channel there, and that will let the string slide and it won't catch the end of the button of the string. So I'll show you. That's what it looks like before. And I'll show you what it looks like after I file the bevel. And there's what it looks like afterwards. You can see the bevel there. And that way the string button won't get caught on the end. If you've ever had those pop out on you, that's why they get caught on the end. Okay, I'm going to stop the camera. I'll string it up and then we'll show you what we have. It's not nearly finished yet, but just with the strings on it right now, I'm pretty darn sure you're going to hear a nice sounding guitar. I played it just a little bit off camera. Let's turn the camera down here. Now, keep in mind the action's still really high. I haven't even checked it yet. But it's got a clean, clear sound already. listen to that sustain. The clarity's there. Oh, it's going to be nice. Now, I'm going to have to unstring this and buff this all out around the finish. I just decided to go ahead and just string it up and let that be the case. I haven't done a fret job on it yet either, which I'm pretty sure he wants it all set up perfectly, so we have to do a little bit more work. But in order to know what work we got to do, I had to, you know, see where I'm at so far. We'll be very careful this time to try to get it as close and accurate as we can, because we're going to work off of this. It's really about 140 thousandths right at the moment, which is very high, of course. 140 thousandths, so I'm going to write that down. I'd say the treble side's right at 125, 26, somewhere in there. So 125, we'll just say, treble. 0.140 on the bass side, 0.125 on the treble side. I'd like to get this down to 0.90 on the bass and a 0.80 on the treble. So what we have to do is we subtract those from each other, and then we double that number that we end up with, and that's how much we have to take off of here. So you have to take twice as much off of here as you want to reduce it halfway back. So if it says we need to reduce it, 50 thousandths, then we need to take 100 thousandths off of this. The nerdy guitar math says we need to take 100 thousandths off of the bass side, which is this side here. I can tell because the bevel goes over this way. The bevel's like this, I'm exaggerating. So this is the bass side. And so we need 100 thousandths off of the bass side. So what I do is I make sure the calipers are at 0, and then I just go to 100 thousandths, tighten it down, and then I've already put black magic marker on here, and I scratch across that, and hopefully you can see the little scratch mark there, probably can. And then that makes it nice and clear where you can see it. And then you just go down to 90 thousandths for the other side, and this is the treble side, and then I put a little scratch mark across there. And it's I can see that very clearly. I think maybe you can too. Hopefully you can see this up close to see how I do this. There's a big gap there, and there's always a risk of this getting pulled down in that gap, and I don't want to take that chance. So what I do is I take a piece of plastic like this that's rigid, and I lay it on here, and the plastic, if it gets cut, it doesn't hurt anything, and then I can go right up there like that very safely. I don't know if you can see that or not, but I've just left the line barely on both sides. And so that gets us very close to where we want to be. I cleaned the back with a damp cloth after buffing it, and then dried it with a dry cloth and buffed it kind of with a dry cloth. Now I'm putting on the wax. And you can see I'm using the Renaissance wax, which I just get this off of eBay or Amazon. I don't remember which one I got it off of, to be truthful. So hopefully I filed enough off of here where we won't have to replace the nut, but I bet we do. The only way we'll know is to string it back up. But we are basically finished with the exception of the nut possibility. I'll show you what it looks like when we get her strung back up. My friends, I couldn't be much happier with the way this guitar turned out. It's just about as perfect as it gets. Yes, it is a real Gibson. It's not a knockoff or something like that. It's a one-owner customer. It's got sentimental value, I'm sure. He wants to give this one to his daughter. As a matter of fact, I believe it's the daughter that was having the heart surgery. And it's as good as it gets. I mean, yeah, there's a little tiny bit of a battle scar in here. You know, that's the price you pay when you have to tear something completely apart. In this case here, we've got a little battle scar. You know, there's not much we can do about that. I mean, I could spend hours and fix it, and that would just raise the price up, and there's no question about that. But I think in the scheme of things, this thing looks plenty good the way it is, and it's fixed. I mean, like that top is flat as a pancake, and it isn't going anywhere. That Paduk under there, it's solid. It's got the crisp clean sound that I was looking for. The antler saddle helps that. The intonation helps that. It's in really, really top shape. It's never been this good. I will guarantee that from the factory. And certainly not with that plywood bridge pad. And absolutely for sure that pad came from the factory. There's no question about that. So there you go. It's perfect. Listen to it and see what it sounds like. That sounds pretty dang good to me. Now keep in mind, that sounds that good, and guess what the strings are? First of all, they're elixirs, which means they're coated, which a lot of folks thinks that tones them down a little bit. In addition, the top string's only a 47 and the bottom string's only a 10. So even with those really light strings and elixirs to boot, listen to that sound, man. It cuts right through. Wow, it's a killer. It'd stand up in any jam. All right, I'm going to start something new from now on. Rather than sing at the end of my rebuilds and things like that, or builds or whatever, unless the songs are original, I'm going to put them in a separate video from now on. So whatever the video number is, the next video out will be the same number with an S. So like if it's 351, for instance, it'll be 351S. And that will be the song that I played with this. And that's all that's going to be on that video. And I'm going to start doing it that way from now on. Yeah, it's a little bit more work for me because I have to put out 2 different videos and upload 2 different videos. But I am tired of all the revenue being taken away, or at least half of it redirected to someone else who had nothing to do with the video. I spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours editing and, putting these videos out, and then find out that YouTube goes, well, there's a copyright claim on that song or whatever, and I don't mind sharing my money, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they deserve half of it. They only did 2 or 3 minutes worth in the song, in the video, and I did hours of work, you know what I mean? So it's just not fair. I don't mind sharing the revenue, I just don't like the way they share it. Or they demonetize the video where you just don't get anything at all. And so you did all that work for absolutely for nothing. So that's the reason I'm doing it, in case you wonder. But from now on, or at least as far as I know from now on, it will be done separately. So you'll have to watch for a separate video to hear the actual song being played on the instrument. So that's all you're going to get on this video. Be watching for the video that'll come right out after this with the song on it. Thank you very much. Tell your friends. I couldn't be happier with this. This truly is, in my opinion, one of my best repairs ever. It really is. I hope you think so too. Thanks for watching.